Hey everybody, this is Alan Brochstein from New Cannabis Ventures, and I have Mike Gorenstein from, I was going to say PharmaCan. No, it's Cronos Group. It's been that for a while. What I was trying to remember is the last time that I interviewed Mike, it was there were two LPs in their stable. One of them has changed names. So if you're not familiar with Cronos Group, you probably are, but if you're not, we're talking about the parent company of Peace Naturals and what's now known as Original BC. Plus, they have a lot of investments in the industry. And if you read the interview, and I'll put a link in this to it, that I did with Michael in late August, one of the questions we talked about was M&A. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this interview with Michael, because there's a lot going on. So before I do that, let me just say, Michael, thank you for dialing in from Las Vegas. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. How are you doing?
I think I'm in better shape than you. It sounds like a zoo there.
You know, it's great. I always use the barometer for the industry. You know, just from year to year, how fast this industry grows, and you see it in the conference. You know, I think there were maybe 6,000 or 7,000 people last year, and maybe 15,000 people here this year. And the participants, sophistication of the companies, it's really neat to see. It's growing at a pace that's almost overwhelming. But it's exciting and certainly a lot going on.
And so our topic is on Canada today. And so before we get going, I think this is the second year in a row where Canada has kind of stolen the thunder in a way from, at least in the capital markets, with respect to this event. Last year, this is when Canopy Growth announced the Metrum deal right around now. And this year we have a couple of things going on. So that's really what I wanted to talk to you about. When we spoke last time when we did that interview, we talked about M&A, and you had some very strong views about the idea that sometimes it's better to build than to buy. And so let's go kind of in reverse order. I want to hit with what's really going on today, which is this whole kind of out of the blue, at least to me, the Aurora hostile proposed takeover of CanniMed. So what are your big picture thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting, and I think it's certainly a smart move from Aurora. And if you look at the nuances of what I said in the build versus buy, it's really a question of accretion dilution. So, what percentage are you giving up of your company if you were to, you know, have to build it yourself because the cash can be fungible with the stock issuances, and then what's the time it takes to actually build out and be able to get the usage versus you know, what's the dilution if you're acquiring a company. And I think sometimes, especially in this industry, what you see in terms of the capital markets and stock price appreciation doesn't necessarily change or correlate with what's going on in your business. So, you know, if you look at it from Aurora's perspective, they've been very heavily favored in the market lately. You know, they've had a pretty big run-up. So one of the advantages of that is they have the opportunity to make acquisitions with their stock as capital, and it's much less dilutive. So if they've been looking at CanniMed, for example, over a month, they can look at it today versus 2 weeks ago, and it's almost half the price it was, you know, a few weeks ago. So I think it's very smart. CanniMed has been, I wouldn't say underperforming as a business, but as far as, you know, how much appreciation they've had relative to other companies, it hasn't really been a darling of the stock market. And when you look at it in that, you know, that frame, it certainly makes sense. I'm sure they're sitting there looking at it as, you know, why aren't we valued higher? You know, we should be valued higher. And Aurora is looking at it as, you know, what can we be combined? So it makes sense from both sides. I think it's a very interesting defense that CanniMed's mounting. You know, they're not able to go seek another buyer because of the lockup that Aurora is able to secure. So if they can do a transaction that doesn't require a shareholder vote, they can make it more difficult to be gobbled up by getting more size.
Yep. So it sounds like you think financially it makes sense. What do you think about the strategic rationale? Did that make sense as well?
Yeah, it certainly does. You know, it's I think that there are different strategies, and some, you know, like if you look at I think Canopy and Aurora are very similar in that it's sort of grow at all costs and get to scale very quickly. And if you look at the way to do that, and if you're looking to have a very large enterprise, you know, this makes a lot of sense for them. And if you look at CanniMed, who's probably a little more focused on percentage ownership of the assets and the future cash flows, it also makes sense to resist. So I think both sides have very intelligent, thought-out strategic rationales for wanting and not wanting the deal. And it's just a battle of will, wits, and courting investors.
So you're an insider in the industry. I know you don't know the folks at CanniMed that well. I don't either. Do you think there's any chance that this ends in a non-hostile way, that they actually kind of get what Aurora's trying to do and work with them? Is that, or is this going to be hostile or not? One of the.
In my former life, I actually did a lot of hostile M&A and large cap space. I would say that usually what you see is if someone's going to launch a hostile, what happens is they approach the management, they offer something, management doesn't believe it's something that they're interested in. So, you go and you say publicly, sort of as everyone's on notice that this group has to consider it. Oftentimes what you'll see is the acquirer will come back with a higher premium.
Right.
And that may incentivize management and the board to say, okay, at this price, we're willing to do it on friendly terms.
Yep.
So it's very possible a lot of hostile deals do end friendly. I know the Aurora guys. I don't personally know the CanniMed guys. But, I would say that on the deal terms we saw, and given the response from CanniMed, I would say there's likely to be a different offer made if it's friendly. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, it doesn't appear that they are interested in doing the deal or even considering it.
Okay. Let's move to another topic, and that was late October, the Constellation Canopy deal. And I just wanted your opinion, kind of, what you thought of that deal, and then also as a CEO of a company with 2 LPs and stakes in others, what do you think that deal means for the industry?
Sure. I think it was always something that, there's 2 aspects I'll talk about that are relevant. It was always something that was understood that alcohol and pharma would be disrupted by the cannabis industry. It was always a question of how would they respond. And, we thought we'd see some entrants, even before this deal. I think a number of the LPs have had conversations with large alcohol, tobacco, and pharma companies. What was surprising was, I think, the timing. It happened earlier than a lot of us would have expected, and we've seen that response from some of the other companies that we've talked to. Is it made them feel like maybe it's a little safer to jump in. So how that will affect the response of the industry, something to watch. And then on the other side, I had a thesis that Canada was really the place to go and build a global platform. And I think a number of companies took that approach rather than doing the state-by-state play. And I think what we just saw, and the most significant part, is validating that thesis and validating Canada as the building block for a global cannabis company. And having a very well-respected and leader in alcohol like Constellation validate that with the investment is huge for everyone.
For sure. Okay, so, and you think that was would you be willing to venture with who got the better deal there, if anybody, or did you think it was the right price? How do you feel about the price?
It's hard to say. I think that it's not necessarily a zero-sum game when you're looking at something like that, because, of course, there's been a really strong market reaction. There's going to be a lot of different power they have, but if you look at the pure pricing, it was certainly more of a discount than you would normally have. But you're paying
right.
for the investor, and you're paying for the cost of that PR individually. If you price it in, it probably makes sense. And then you really won't know until we understand what the strategic partnership ultimately looks like, what the value add is. Is it just a pure play investment? So I don't know that. I think what's clear is both sides won the deal, so to speak. I don't think it's one versus the other, and it's hard to speak without knowing all their initiatives.
Okay, and I know you're busy. We'll just get one last question, if that's all right. So last time when I interviewed you, you said Cronos Group's likely to be builders rather than buyers, so we can just take you out of the whole equation. But what do you think about the rest of the industry in terms of consolidation with this Aurora hostile bid, maybe out of the blue? And how do you see this impacting? And if you want to name some names, that'd be great. But you know, the big LPs especially.
Well, look, there are always discussions. I think that for a few weeks, people have kind of known who's circling, but typically when you see one underperforming and one overperforming in terms of market value, that's when it starts to make the most sense. Will it affect a lot? I think like Constellation, it may wake people up or have everyone say, okay, something's happening, I'm going to start thinking of the strategic rationale. But I don't know if it necessarily sends ripple effects. But what I'd watch for is if CanniMed doesn't end up doing a deal with Aurora, I don't think it's likely that Aurora is going to say, okay, we're not going to go make an acquisition. Let's just go back to what we were doing. I think they start looking elsewhere.
Okay, and then just extending on that question, I've noticed, I break the market up into three segments. You've got maybe the big six, the ones that are generating a lot of revenue right now and really scaling rapidly. Then I have kind of the middle, which would include Peace Naturals, and then you have kind of what I would call the third tier, and it's not a quality thing, but it's just the fact that they're not selling yet. And I'm just curious, I know you're not going to be an acquirer, but in terms of doing these deals, it seems like that there may be, there's a lot of companies in that middle tier, and you mentioned stock performance, where they came public, they have plateaued, and they're just kind of sitting where they've been sitting for the last few months. Do you think those types of companies might be acquired, or are people going to be more interested in the ones that are really kind of cranking out the revenue already?
Yeah, look, I can't speak because I can't speak to that because that would be an assumption that every other LP is operating maybe I'd say fiscally responsibly or rationally, and that's not always the case. A lot of it can be emotionally driven. But look, and I also wouldn't say we're not a consolidator. We're just different. If you look at the Israel deal, that is a M&A deal. We're just not putting any cash up front for the acquisition. It's tough. Like for me, I'm going to always look at if you aren't generating revenue, if you don't have a facility built out, and it would cost $150 million to acquire you, why should I do that when for $150 I could build a production capacity that's 10x the size?
Got it.
So
okay.
It depends if people think like that, and so I think that's going to drive it.
Got it.
Now,
okay.
You may see more merger of equals, though. That would make more sense.
I see. That's a good thought. Okay. Well, hey, I always appreciate checking in with you. You've got such a great skill set with your, what you've learned over the last few years in the cannabis industry, and then obviously your investment background as well. So I appreciate you taking the time. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Sure. Thanks so much.